Yes, velkommen tilbake alle sammen. Vi får rulle videre. Neste innlegg kommer fra Dr. Joe Kort, som klinisk direktør og grunnlegger av The Center for Relationship and Sexual Health. Og så var han tidligere meddirektør I Modern Sex Therapy Institute, men det han altså ikke lenger. Jeg har vært på, altså når vi snakker om Chemsex, så snakker vi om sex. Men I mange sammenhenger med Chemsex, altså konferansesammenheng, så har det et lite fokus på det å være positivt innstilt til sex, det å være nysgjerrig på sex. Hvis dere ser på den glossaryen dere har fått ut, så står det litt som BDSM-praksiser, det står ting som fisting, wet sex, ting som jeg kan høre uten å blunke, men som kanskje ikke alle like komfortabelt med å snakke om. Så det et lite smil bak der, bare man nevner navnene, eller begrepene. Joe Kort her for å lære oss litt om å være komfortabel med seksualitet. Hello, Dr. Joe Kort, are you with us?
If you have questions, I won't see anybody raise a hand, so will you let me know if somebody does or has a question?
I will.
Okay, all right. So hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here. Anytime I can talk about sexual health and just sexuality, it's a really important topic to me. So I'm glad to help you include this in the work that you do and however that is. Just a little bit about me. I've been a social worker, therapist for almost 37 years, going on 37 years. And in my work, I do individual and couples therapy. I do supervision. And I, of course, now with COVID, I do a lot of Zoom all across the world. So people contact me for all kinds of things that we're going to talk about today. And I'm an imago relationship therapist. So I don't just do sexuality. I do relationship therapy. I also do trauma. So of the 37 years, 22 of those years were that I was a sex addiction therapist. I am no longer that. I don't believe in sex addiction at all. I know a lot of people, when they're doing chemical addiction, it's an easy way then to go right to sex addiction. The problem is in the sex addiction community, there is no sexual training. So the therapists learn a lot about trauma. They learn a lot about addiction. They learn nothing about sexual health unless they choose to go find it somewhere else. And I think I find that to be unethical. I feel that if you're working with sexual disorders, you should know how to work with sexual disorders. So when I began to learn it as a sex addiction therapist, I went to what's called ASECT, American Association of Sex Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, and they train you in sexual health. And the more training that I received about sex therapy, about erotic orientation, about everything I'm going to teach you today, the more I realized that the addiction model is not effective. In fact, it's ineffective in working with sexual problems. And I hope to at least give you that way of thinking today, and then you can decide for yourself. And it doesn't mean that someone doesn't struggle with sexually compulsive behaviors, problematic sexual behaviors, out of control sexual behaviors. People do. But it's to label it as an addiction can be quite harmful to somebody. So we'll talk about that. I have my PhD in clinical sexology. So I really went full force in my 40s to look at sex and sexual health. So, and I stay on top of all my trainings. I try to do that as much as I can. And I blog on Psychology Today. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about today, I have also written about. I have 4 books. The first 2 books are about gay men. I have revised them because in LGBTQ culture, things are changing so rapidly. I wrote a book for therapists on working with these clients, but this I'm going to talk about to some degree too. The book is called Is My Husband Gay, Straight, or Bi? But it's really about straight men who have sex with men. They're not gay. They're not bisexual. They're straight men who have sex with men. And that is a really big part of chemical dependencies, particularly crystal meth. You see a lot of straight men who are engaging in same-sex behavior. And sadly, an untrained therapist will identify them and label them as gay or bisexual when they're not. So we'll talk about that. And then I do a podcast. I love this on smartsexsmartlove.com is where you can find it, on Apple, on Google, on Spotify, whatever. And I have interviewed sex workers. I've worked with therapists. people that are struggling with autism, Asperger's. It's been a really great. I'm in my third season. I highly recommend. We just did one on asexuality. So, and I'll be talking about asexuality here as well. All right. And then I run a center here in Royal Oak, Michigan. It's right outside Detroit. And here's what's important about me telling you this. We have 17 therapists. I try to be as diverse as possible. We have trans therapists, cisgender, female sex therapists, people of color. And we are doing so well that we had to move, or we had to look for more space to expand our space. In the building that I was in, there was no space. So I had to look around and find space across the street. We signed the lease. It took about 8 months to build out the actual suite. 3 weeks before we were going to move in. Now, we'd already changed our address. Insurance payments were going to be coming to this new place. A female middle-aged pediatrician told the landlord, because she saw our signage, the Center for Relationship and Sexual Health. She saw that on the sign and she said, I will not allow you to put that sign up. It needs to come down. I don't want pedophiles in the building. It'll scare away my patients. So the landlords contacted me and said, we're going to be taking it down, and here's why. And I said, we don't work with non-consent. We're a sexual health center. We work with all consent. And if somebody came in and they were attracted to children or had abused a child, we refer them out. And he said, then you need to go talk to her. And if she doesn't budge, she's a longtime tenant, we're going to remove it. So I did go talk to her. She wouldn't budge. They took down the sign and we did not move in. We ended up staying in the space that we had already, and more space became available. So we stayed. But here's my tagline on what happened to me. When it comes to sex, the most uncomfortable people in the room have all the power. Let me say that again. It's so important. When it comes to sex, the most uncomfortable people have all the power. In other words, this tenant who was uncomfortable had the power to have me removed. The therapist, the counselor, the addiction therapist, if you're uncomfortable, you have all the power in the room to modify what's going on in your client's sexuality. A partner in couples therapy, if they're uncomfortable, then they have all the power in the relationship around sexuality. And we want to change that. We don't want anyone to have any power over anyone else. We want to have you have power over yourself, but to not be so afraid of sex and sexual health and sexual fantasies. So that's my goal, is that as we're done today, you'll get more comfortable within yourselves. But that means you have to deal with your own countertransference. And hopefully that comes up for you today. As I'm talking, I'm going to say things that you might not agree with. You may be vehemently opposed to the things that I'm saying. It's okay. Maybe I'm not right. Maybe I'm teaching it in a way that's not right. I'm open to that. But usually the case is you got uncomfortable. You hit a soft spot, an unexamined part of your own sexuality that you're disgusted by or uncomfortable with. And now you make me the problem, or the content the problem. And I'm going to ask you to just sit with that. This is the greatest place to sit with it, right here in this room. Because when you're in front of a client, you shouldn't be sitting with unexamined feelings. They should be sorted out as much as possible. And if they're not, you should be able to regulate yourself in the therapy room when you're doing treatment and not put it on your client. People need to examine their own sexual and abuse histories. Lots of us have histories around abuse, and many therapists and counselors and educators don't address it. They don't deal with it. They never heal it. So now that becomes part of how they work with people. Everything they see is through a sexual abuse lens. Oh, you're into that kind of sexual thing? You must have been abused. Instead of understanding maybe they were abused, or just understanding that this is normal for them and has nothing to do with abuse. You want to learn to put aside your judgments about what you think sex should be or should look like. So I'm a gay man, and I've had to sort of fight my entire life, heteronormativity against it, to say, no, the way I like to have sex may not be the way you want to have sex, but it's the way I like to have sex. And there's nothing, your judgment shouldn't impact about what I do and what I like. So you really want to get clear about what your judgments are, and they might work for you and they might work for some clients, but they're not going to work for all clients. And like I said earlier, I talk about the disgust response. I see this in couples, right? A partner says, "Hey, I'd like to get into this certain sexual thing. Can we do this in bed?" And the partner doesn't want to. They have a disgust response, like, "That's disgusting. I'm not doing that." And then they make their partner disgusting. So I'm disgusted. That means you're disgusting. And now you have that couple coming into the therapy room, and the partner's not disgusting. They are just interested in something that doesn't feel good to the other partner. And that's the work. If you treat it as a sexual problem, it's not really a sexual problem. It's a disgust problem. The sexual issue would start to be worked through if you can help somebody who feels disgusted, even within yourself. You're going to hear things. Maybe you already have. I do throughout a day when clients come in, and most things I can deal with. But sometimes I'm like, in my head, I'm thinking, that's disgusting. I would never do it. But I can see that it's pleasure for the client across from me. And I can distinguish the two, differentiate. I can hold on to my disgust response and not make them disgusting. So you want to learn to protect your clients from us. We all are in this field to protect our clients from our bias, from what we think the world should look like for them. And the longer I'm in this field, the more we're realizing, while I'm going to be speaking in generalizations today, while I'll be making some broad strokes, clients are all individualized. You should be thinking about the things you know in general, but customizing it and individualizing it to the people across from you. All right. So you want to know what your erotic code is, and your client's erotic code, and what each partner's erotic code is. Is sex about procreation? Is sex about being relational? Is sex about being recreational? Is it all three? Is it only two of the three? You have to get in touch with each partner and yourself. So I've worked with Jehovah's Witnesses. I've worked with Orthodox Jews who their way of being sexual is procreation. And there have been times in my past where I forget that, and I start to introduce recreational or relational type of sex, and they politely say to me, "That's not what we're here for. Please don't. You're overstepping your bounds." And I am, because I forgot about their erotic codes. I was inserting my erotic codes. So you need to know what all these are. And then in terms of sexuality, we have a sexual identity to whom we're attracted: male, female, both, neither, multiple genders. Then we have our sexual preferences. These are what we like, things we like to do in the bedroom: positions, fantasies, and then behaviors. What are we going to do actually in the bedroom? We may have preferences that are fantasies and desires, but maybe we do or don't do them in the bedroom. And then we have our fantasies that we may or may never tell our partner. We live in a world, though, that says if your sexual identity is gay, then all your preferences and behavior and fantasies should be towards same sex. If you're straight, they should all be toward opposite sex. If you're bisexual, then both or multiple genders. But that's not how this works for the most part. Many people are straight, and some of their preferences, behavior, and fantasies include same sex. Many people are gay and lesbian, and many of their fantasies and preferences and behaviors include opposite sex. So we can't say that. Just like when clients come into my office and they put on the intake form, I ask them, "Are you gay? Are you lesbian? Are you heterosexual? Are you bisexual? Are you pansexual?" I have a lot of different choices, or other. They'll come in and let's say they tell me they're lesbian. That tells me nothing about her sexual behavior. It tells me nothing about her sexual history, because I don't know if she's been with men, if she wants to be with men, if she's currently with men. So I will say to her, "Can you tell me what lesbian means to you?" So she explains to me what it means for her to be a lesbian. That's important. And I ask my clients, even if they tell me they're straight, have you ever had a same-sex experience? Have you ever had a same-sex attraction? If they're gay and lesbian, I ask the same thing. Have you ever had an opposite sex experience, an opposite sex attraction? And I want to remind us what I'm talking about here is sexual freedom, sexual health, sexual pleasure. That's not really addressed a lot in addiction or in chemical dependency. Even in marital therapy, even in trauma therapy, people are not free to express what is sexual pleasure to them. And that becomes a place they're shut down, and that harms any form, in my opinion, and impairs forms of recovery, because now their recovery is stunted because they have a whole section of who they are that can't be included in their recovery. You also want to know the difference between erotic orientation and sexual orientation. Our sexual orientation is like our sexual identity, to whom we're attracted, male, female, neither, both, multiple genders. Erotic orientation are the things that get us off, the things that bring us to orgasm, the kinks, the fetishes, the vanilla, the positions. So let me give you an example. I've worked with many lesbians who have had rape fantasies, where they are only attracted to women, only are sexual with women, but in some of their fantasies, they think about men raping them violently sometimes. They've never had it happen. They're never going to make it happen. But it's very upsetting to them because they come to the office and say, if I'm a lesbian and I'm against rape, why am I fantasized? Why is that a go-to fantasy for me that brings me to orgasm? And what I will teach you to say, that I say to them, is because it's just a fantasy. That's all we're talking about. Sometimes we'll know where fantasies come from, and I'll teach you how to do that in this hour. I have a lot to do, but I want to teach you a little bit on how to help somebody understand where it comes from. And sometimes you'll never know. It's just there in your head. It doesn't mean you're not a lesbian. It doesn't mean you're in favor of rape. It's rape play. In our fantasies, everybody's having a good time. In our fantasies, everybody wants to be there, and it's consensual, even if it's violent and non-consent. It's an agreed upon non-consent in our head. This gets kind of complicated. You can see a nuance, so that a lot of people who are untrained in sex say, no, if you're thinking that, then something's wrong with you, and we need to keep you in therapy until that all goes away. It often will never go away. Our fantasies are with us. It doesn't mean we have to act on them. It doesn't mean we have to keep the volume high on them and keep them going if we don't want to. But it's unlikely that you're ever going to help somebody get rid of a fantasy. We always say you can't give somebody an erotic ectomy, right? Clients come in and say, do surgery in my brain and slice this thing out. I feel so awful about it. We can't. We want to help them understand it, make friends with it, and then decide how they want to live with it and how they want to act on it. I'm talking really fast, so if there are questions, please don't hold back. I'm going to keep going. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. All right. So common complaints of clients. I'm not going to get into all these, and I'm happy to share this PowerPoint with you so that you have it. But people don't want to spend their time in the therapy room teaching you about sexual health. They want you to have at least some basic foundational understanding and terminology, so that they're not spending their time and their money justifying their behaviors to you and legitimizing their behaviors to you. And you can absolutely express concerns around safety, health, and well-being. So sometimes people engage in things and you're like, is that really safe? That's different than saying, that doesn't sound safe. That's not that. What is that healthy? That's a biased, judgmental. Instead to say, so tell me about the health part of this. How is this about sexual health? What kind of safety measures do you have in place when you're doing this? I don't know about this behavior. Can you teach this to me and help me understand how it adds to your well-being? The biggest issue counselors and therapists struggle with, they can deal with, I think because we've had so much in our culture, like Shades of Grey, the movie about BDSM. Therapists are more understanding these days of, hey, people like impact play. They like to be spanked. They like to be flogged. They might like to be slapped. There's like some impact play that people get off on. Not everyone's comfortable, but they're more comfortable than people who want to be humiliated, people who want to be choked, people who want to be spit on, people who want to be called faggot, or just negative words but some people find extreme pleasure in that kind of scenario in the bedroom. It's based on consent. It's based on saying, hey, in the bedroom, I'm going to be a very different person than I am in during the day. There's a great, if you don't know this woman, her name is Esther Perel, and she has a great line. She says, what we protest in the streets is what often gets us off between the sheets. And she's right. The things that we would never participate in our daily lives turn us on in the bedroom. You want to ask your clients to really, my talk is really to introduce you to how can you be comfortable asking questions and listening to their sexual narrative without judgment, without shutting them down, without making them feel like that there's something wrong with them. Because your personal beliefs, how you were raised religiously, culturally, morally, where you were around the world, what region you're in, everything impacts you. And when you become a sex therapist, they challenge all of that. You go through all kinds of workshops to kind of desensitize and reprogram yourself so you can sit with someone else's sexuality. In 2006, the World Health Organization created this. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but in yellow, pleasure and safety, sexual rights, and protection were the key words here. I'm going to tell you that in 2012, they removed the word pleasure. So no longer does World Health Organization include pleasure, which drives me crazy because in our Western culture, at least I know, we can talk about sexual functioning. We can talk about what happens to the body medically around genitalia. But if it's pleasure, people are not talking about that. And that's sad because sexual pleasure is important because you want to help your clients manage pleasure and safety by also protecting their own sexual rights. Pleasure and safety and protecting their own sexual rights. So Doug Brown Harvey is a great sex therapist. He's taught me a lot of this. So he just pulled these words, where is it? Right out of this definition by the World Health Organization. So I like to teach accurate terminology and healthy norms among LGBT, but really among sex. Today's about sex. So you want to talk about porn actors and actresses. You want to remember that people who are making pornography and erotica are actors and actresses, and that there's I interviewed him on my podcast, Miles Stryker. He's a porn actor. He said he's got a great quote. We're not making love, he says. We're making movies. And that's important because a lot of people think that this is about sex. It's about making love. And that's not necessarily true in what you're seeing. Instead of calling somebody a prostitute up on a dance pole, they're dancers. They're erotic dancers. There's cyber sex workers. That is a big, big thing. It's a growing thing. And actually, if you get on Twitter, you can find cyber sex workers everywhere. It's like, for whatever reason, Twitter has been have the ability to let these people market themselves and display the kinds of things they offer their clients. And again, we don't say prostitute in sex therapy. We say sex worker. Prostitute is really a legal term. And while it is illegal in many parts of the world, we don't see it as something negative as sex therapists. And I don't. And instead of saying sex worker versus prostitute, I love this. I got this from somebody on another slide. If you mean exploitive sex work, because that can happen, say that, because people start thinking this way. If you mean underage sex work, yeah, that's a problem. Say that. If you mean migrant sex work, then say that. But what happens when you start talking about sex work, people get into trafficking, people get into minors, and the most uncomfortable person controls the conversation. So they move it to a non-consent place. When we as sex therapists talk about sex work, we're not talking about non-consent. We're talking about people that are openly willing to offer their bodies and offer their fantasies to a client who are willing to exchange that for money. And then some people don't like the word porn. So we're trying to play with different words: sexual imagery, erotic watching of television, erotica. I don't know if any of you have heard of this term cliterature. This is a very well-known word today, where it's really about female porn, right? So shades of gray, Twilight, different things that women turn them on, that we don't call that porn for them. We call it literature. And what we won't talk about today, but I want to put in your mind is porn really the problem, or is it about porn illiteracy? In other words, I think in your country, I think it's Norway, that you teach sexual health to, I think to middle school and high school. We don't do that in here. We believe that all porn is bad, and that you're always going to learn something negative and unrealistic in porn. And while that can be true, there's lots of porn that is instructional and teaches you exactly the ways you want to have sex. For instance, gay male porn. A lot of gay male porn is done so well that if we're gay men, watching gay male porn, even as a teen, can help you understand how to find pleasure with another man. It's not all negative, and it's not all unrealistic. And at the bottom here, I put, a lot of people will say, and your clients will say, I'm using porn. You don't use porn. It's like saying, if someone says, hey, I spent the whole weekend watching Netflix and the whole weekend was lost, I binge watched all these shows. People say, oh, what'd you watch? Did you have a good time? Next weekend will be better. But if you say, I binge watched Pornhub and I lost the whole weekend, I was watching all these different fetish and kink and whatever, people look at you like, what's wrong with you? Why would you use Pornhub? You didn't. Just like Netflix, you watched it. You may have lost a weekend, but our bias against something sexual starts showing up when it's something between Pornhub and Netflix. Could there be a problem? Sure, but not necessarily. There could be a problem with Netflix. The person could be doing this every weekend and not telling you. So the other thing is you want to move away from saying healthy sexuality, because that implies a binary, that if this is unhealthy and this is healthy. And who decides that? You, the partner, the religion, the culture, who? But if you say sexual health, that gives people the freedom to decide for themselves, what is sexual health for me, not you. And then remembering that we're treating people's lives and that their symptoms may not be symptoms at all. They may just be traits that are coming out of their normal sexual interests. You know, when we talk about paraphilias, we're trying to get them removed out of the DSM because we understand that many of them are based on, are really about sexual health, not all of them. Frauderism, pedophilia is obviously illegal, non-consensual. But we also know, see, this is part of why being a sex therapist is helpful. We understand that there are people that are pedophilia that will never touch a child. I don't work with that, so I don't know who will and who won't. But it is helpful for me to know that just because somebody has fantasies about children doesn't mean they're going to act on them. And then some of these things are just old-fashioned transvestic fetishism. So really, most of these things need to be removed because they're not problematic to the person. They're not engaged. Everybody's not engaging in non-consensual behavior. It can become non-consensual, but anything can. But because it's sexual and because there was and when I say that there's a bias in the mental health field, it's because the mental health field has locked out any sexual health information. We've had sexual health all along, but every time it tried to get into mental health or addiction or couples therapy or trauma therapy, it was shut back and said, we don't want you. And this was disturbing to me when I was not trained in sexual health, because I would help somebody with trauma. I would help somebody with an addiction. They'd get better, but then we would both be lost about what's sexual health for them. We'd be lost. So I'm not lost anymore. And not that I tell somebody what it is, but I can help guide them to what it is for them. And I feel really good about that. You know, a lot of times people think that kink is a diagnosis, that kink must come from trauma, right? So if someone's into humiliation, slapping, spitting, I don't know, BDSM, being tied up, gagged, being treated like a human pony, a human dog, a puppy, adult baby. I mean, there's so many different kinks and fetishes. I mean, those are just like a few in thousands of them. Therapists get uncomfortable they think to themselves, well, that's not normal. Normal is the missionary position where two people are loving and eye gazing. And well, that might be normal for some couples, but there are other couples that just want to get into these fetishes and kinks, and that's normal for them. And that's their own orientation. Some people, they're starting to say, have a kink orientation. This is who they are. This is their identity. So I want to start to give you that. And the research shows that, because a lot of people think, well, they must have been abused in as childhood because they've already decided this is not normal. So abuse must have caused the abnormal. And the research shows there's no higher rate of abuse in people who are kinky than people who aren't. There's the same ratio. So you can't put, can it come from trauma? Yes. Anything sexually can come from trauma. Let me give you this example. We worked with a client at our clinic who came to us because he was only attracted to women who were missing a limb, a leg. So either left or right leg, it didn't matter. And he didn't even need to watch porn. He would watch YouTube videos with women who were on crutches and they were missing a limb. This would bring him great joy, erotic joy. He would orgasm, like crazy with this. But he started to get uncomfortable because he felt like he was objectifying these women. So we did a history on him. And I'm all about genograms. I don't know how many of you are trained in doing genograms, but I'm shocked at how many therapists don't do this because I feel like I'm working in the dark. If I have a client in front of me and I don't know tell me about your mother, tell me about your father, tell me about your grandparents, tell me about your siblings. Were they good people? Did you love them? What were your best experiences? What were your worst? Because all of that shapes who we are as adults. It shapes how we have sex as an adult. Esther Perel, I'm going to quote her again. She has a famous line. Tell me how you were loved as a child, and I'll tell you how you make love as an adult. I fucking love that. I think it's just so right on. So let's go back to my client. When he was a little boy, his mother was fully able-bodied, but so depressed she couldn't get off the couch. So they lived on government assistance. Across the hall was a woman who was missing a left leg. But she worked every day. She went up and down the stairs. She brought up groceries. He would offer to help her. She would say, I don't need your help, but I'll take your company. Come on. And he did, and he really liked her. So when his sexual orientation kicked in, it was to women. When his erotic orientation kicked in, it was to female amputees. So in our fantasies, in our heads, we right the wrong. So the wrong here was having a disempowered mother, and that was very depressing for him. But this powerful woman across the hall became part of his eroticism. It brought him pleasure in life. It brought him pleasure sexually. I'm going to keep going. So yeah. And then, just to understand, not everybody who's having sex is engaging genitals. They're not getting erections. They're not having orgasm. And you might think, well, how is that sex? It's sex for them. They like the play. They like the power exchange. They like the role play. They like the idea of leading up to it and never getting there. There's all kinds of ways to be sexual that doesn't look like sexuality to you, but it is to them. I'm not going to get into each one. I have a lot of slides just to remind myself what I want to say. I'm going to keep going. There's all these. You'll have this. Somebody might want to be handcuffed all day, and they never touch themselves, and they never have an orgasm. Some men like to have chastity, where they cage up their genitals, their cage, and someone else holds the key. That's erotic to them all day. It could be weeks that they're wearing this cage, and it may not be sexual to you. You might think, well, how is that sexual? Well, if you're making that face, it probably won't be to you. Or maybe it's unexamined in you. Maybe you would like a cage. I don't know. But this guy, your client, likes it. I'm going to keep going because of time. Talked about a lot of this stuff. I have a lot to say. There are people that, so sometimes things do come from trauma. So I had a guy, not every adult baby. An adult baby it's also called infantilism, where somebody likes to be treated like a baby, diapered, pacifier, and they're a full-grown adult. But the idea of regression can turn them on. I had this one guy who was, as a child, had an older sister who didn't like him, and she would put a diaper over his face, stick him with pins. It was back when they used cloth diapers a long time ago. And she would masturbate him. So as an adult, what happened was he would go to nurseries after hours, go into the dumpsters, get out soiled diapers, put them over his face and masturbate himself. He was reenacting his trauma. So sometimes things do come from that. That's why you have to do thorough histories to help understand where this came from. And so then the work became, for him, dealing with the unresolved trauma of having a sister do this to him. Let's see. I keep going because I have more things I want to talk about. Yeah, and sometimes it can be self-destructive, abusive, and criminal. You want to work all that out. If I have a client that it's so abusive and criminal to someone else, I don't work with them. I'm not trained in that. I have compassion for that person, but I want you to go see somebody who is training in that. But if you're working with somebody that, yeah, they like to be abusive and self-destructive, but they do it within limits and it's helpful to them, and there are limits to it and it turns them on. Like there are some people that get off on almost contracting HIV. So they'll partner with people that are HIV positive. They may or may not wear condoms, but they'll engage in enough boundaries where they almost get it, but they don't. And you might be thinking, well, that sounds pathological. It might be, but for other people, it's highly erotic. Think about this. We are all pretty much okay with watching people go up in a plane and jump out in a parachute. We're all okay with watching mountain climbers. Many they fall to their deaths, right? But we're watching. We'll even pay money to watch it. If that guy or woman climbs that mountain and she's naked and masturbating, or she's coming out of the parachute naked and masturbating, then we go, whoa, what's going on? It's a sexual bias all of a sudden. But how is that bias any more or any different to somebody who's taking sexual risks in the bedroom? So I just give you these things to really challenge yourself and think about. And many people in especially in kink, fetish, and alternative lifestyles, they're all about safe, sane, and consent. And here's the bigger issue is most people in monogamous, vanilla relationships, in other words, there's no kink, it's just monogamy, it's just normal, what we consider normal in our world. They don't negotiate their monogamy. When couples come in and say, we're monogamous, I still ask them, have you negotiated that? And they look at me like, what is there to negotiate? Well, can you masturbate separately? Can you send out dick pics? Can you receive genital pictures? Can you cam with a Romanian person in another country while you're in Norway that you're never going to meet? Can you watch pornography? Can you flirt? Most couples don't negotiate those things, and they should. It shouldn't just be for open relationships. Most couples who don't engage in kink don't negotiate sex, and they don't have the language. Hey, I want to be sexual. Here's what I want. Here's what I don't want. I want you to do this, but I don't want you to do this. Alternative couples, kinky couples do that. Open couples do that. We have a growing understanding today and lots of great research today that show that open relationships can work. In fact, this is the saddest part of this work. We know more and spend more time on infidelity, and we spend more money on affairs and understanding them than we do with people that are engaging in open relationships that are ethical and honest and consensual. And that's just sad to me that we don't look at these people and say, how are you able to do this right so that people don't end up having to have an affair or infidelity? Let's see. Pass on that. But yeah, you have to check in with yourself. Hopefully you've been doing this as I've been talking the last 45 minutes of what are my bias? What am I uncomfortable with? What is getting me upset? What is validating to me? I'm hoping I'm validating some of you in the room. So sex addiction, sadly, is sort of becoming increasingly outdated as we work in the sex therapy field, because what it does is target somebody's erotic orientation. So if you come to me and you say to me, yeah, watching porn or I don't know, I'm trying to think, going to prostitutes, sex workers, I just made that mistake. I'm doing it so much, it's out of control. I'm a sex addict. And then what would happen in the sex addiction industry is then you can never see a sex worker again. You never can watch porn again. And that might be able to be done, but it also might be that it's normal for this person. They just haven't learned to manage it. We had a client in our office where he was kinky. He was into women's feet. And he had always been since he was age 10. He took pictures of his stepsister's feet. He wrote feet on the wall. He would masturbate. He was early puberty. The parents did nothing other than take the pictures off the phone and erase it off the wall. They never helped him manage his kink. They never talked to him about his kink. So now he's 17 and he starts stealing his stepsister's socks and shoes and sneaking into her room and kissing her feet while she's sleeping. This looks criminal. It is. It's non-consent. She didn't agree to this, but he's not a criminal. It's not about that. It's an unmanaged kink. Nobody taught him at 10. He went into shame and hiding around it because of how it was dealt with. And now it's coming out in a negative way. Nobody taught him, hey, getting into feet is great, but going into your sister's room is not. You would think people would have common sense not to do it, but not a teenager, not a kid who doesn't understand it, and not an immature teenager. So it's things like that. So then he might be accused of being a sex addict. It's just such a low-hanging fruit, culturally constructed. It's a cultural construction. It's not in the DSM. It's not in the ICD. I really urge you to stay away from it. Sadly, this is what I mean. And this is a slide taken right from a sex addiction training that I went in recently. And they say, the presenter said, if anybody's engaging in any of these behaviors, they're probably a sex addict. I thought my head was going to explode in the room. Thank God I was in Zoom in my own house, right? I wasn't going to get it on anybody. But this makes me crazy. You cannot say that any of these behaviors indicate anything other than a behavior that your client is expressing. You want to understand what it means to this client. You don't want to tell them, sorry, your erotic orientation is really, it ends up being conversion therapy, right? For gays and lesbians and bisexuals, we would be, and it still goes on, conversion therapy. You don't like being gay and lesbian, so you need to find a way to be attracted to the opposite sex. My erotic orientation is to men. It's not to women. It's not going to work. My erotic orientation might be to having pain exchange sex. It might be to have, it might be that I'm having an affair, affairs, multiple affairs, but maybe I'm not monogamous. Has anybody given me permission to understand that monogamy is not for me, but I'm from a religion or I'm from a culture or I'm from a family that required it. So I think that I have to be, but I'm not. So some of these things are just normal. Some of these things are intimacy and attachment disorders. They come from sexual abuse and trauma. Sometimes coming out gay and bisexual and lesbian, they go through a gay adolescence. So there's like a hypersexuality that goes on for 2 or 3 years. They look like sex addicts, but they're not. It's a delayed adolescence of having multiple partners over time that goes away after a couple of years. Some people have high sex drives. They like to have multiple partners, multiple experiences throughout every day. Some people have personality disorders, shame. Shame will turbocharge your sexual compulsivity. So you really want to help people. I feel like I'm a shame reductioner. Every day, the people come in, I'm helping everybody, including myself over the years, get rid of the shame. I feel really proud of myself. I'm a sexual abuse survivor. So I went to a trauma therapist in my 30s. And I remember her saying to me, and my perpetrator was my mother. So I was a female. And I didn't purposely choose a female therapist, but I did unconsciously. And she said to me, for me to help you, I have to know every single detail of what you get off on. And I was like, fuck that. I'm not telling a woman what are the kinds of things that go on. So I waited a year. I kept seeing her. And then I finally did. And we I only have a few more minutes, so I want to get into what we did, but we uncovered the non-sexual narrative of what I get off on. In other words, everything had a reason. I could understand, I engaged in that behavior because of what my uncle did to me. I engaged in that behavior because of what my mother did to me. She got rid of my shame. I had self-compassion, and that's invaluable to people. A lot of people, I already said, have sexual kinks and fetishes. I hate the word paraphilia. I want to take that out. But if it is a paraphilia, it just means that somebody's identity is committed to some kind of a sexual kink or sexual fetish. How much time do I have left? Is it 10 minutes?
Yes.
Okay. And then some people, they use sex to regulate their emotions. I'm not saying that all of these should just be like, let the client do this. Help them understand. Don't slap a sex addiction label on them. I love this line. He's Jack Moran. This is a great book, by the way. If you go to war with your sexuality, you will lose and end up in more trouble than before you started. I love that. And then what these authors talk about is that most therapists engage in premature evaluation. Your client comes in and says, I think I'm a sex addict, and so does my wife. So then you're like, okay, let's get you the books. Let's get you a 12-step group. But you wouldn't do that if you went to the doctor. If you went to the doctor and says, I think I have kidney cancer, and my wife agrees, the doctor wouldn't say, well, thank God I don't have to do all those tests. Let's get that kidney out, get you on chemo, and then get on with your life. The doctor would say, slow down. We have to do a lot of testing. I need to get to know you before we know that you actually have kidney cancer. We should be doing that with sexual disorders as well. And rather than the sex addiction model focuses on people's behavior, the out of control sexual behavior model focuses on these 6 principles. Is what you're doing consensual, non-exploitive, protected against STD, STIs, and pregnancy and HIV? Is it honest? Is it shared values? Is it mutually pleasurable? Their model believes that the closer you are to these 6 principles, the less likely you'll have compulsive sexual behavior. These 2 books are out there just to normalize the watching of porn. There's a book here called His Porn, Her Pain, and the author recognizes right from the beginning, I called it this, he said, because gay and lesbian couples often don't fight over porn as much as straight couples do. They talk about it. They understand the watching of it separately from one another, differently than straight couples. I'm going to keep going because I want to get into, and this will be how I get to the end here in 10 minutes, in 9 minutes. We all have an erotic intelligence. We all have an arousal template. Embedded in our sexual fantasies is our core identities. So I call this cracking the erotic code. In other words, when your clients come in and they're struggling, I don't know why I get off on this. I don't know why I get into this. You want to help them. You need to know every detail about their sexual interest because the non-sexual narrative will be there, but you won't know that unless you've done a genogram. So if I have a healthy family history on what happened for you, and now you tell me your sexual fantasies, I can tell you which ones connect. They don't all connect. I have had clients that said, I was a Cub Scout and 8 years old, and I learned knotting, tying ropes, and I had an erection the whole time. And I remember that was the first time I realized that I liked tying people up. Now, that wasn't a trauma. He wasn't shaped in that way of eroticism. It was the first time he discovered it. I've had people say, well, I remember being spanked and loving it and wanting to be spanked again. But it wasn't eroticizing the trauma, which could happen. It was more that was the first time I discovered that I liked being spanked. So let's see. Yeah, this is that line. I loved Esther Perel's line. Tell me how you were loved as a child, and I'll tell you how you make love as an adult, because we return to, we reenact what's going on, whether it's from trauma or whether it's just from what we learned in childhood. I have way too many slides here, but I do want you to remember that a lot of what I talked about today is consent. A lot of what I talked about here is in the fantasy, in the experiences I'm having with somebody, we're all having a good time. If somebody's not having a good time, it's a turnoff to people, unless you're turned on by somebody who doesn't have a good time. Now, I mean, I'm going to end with something controversial, which is there's something called, and I had to get used to this, consensual non-consent. Some people get off on, yeah, I want to play rape, but I do want you to rape me. I give you permission to do it. We know it's play, but I want it to feel real. People do that. There's a lot. That's like a new and growing thing in people. I've actually been learning, and I've actually was quoted in a New York Times article. This is becoming my new kind of specialty, FinDom, financial domination, where women will, and now straight men are getting into this, and some gay men and lesbians. So this crosses all sexual orientations and gender identities. So what happens is somebody says, I'm going to give you all my money. You're going to have access to my bank account, my credit card. I'm going to give you naked pictures of myself. I'm going to tell you who my wife is, where I work, my boss's name. And if now you're in control of me, if I don't pay you and I don't allow you to use my credit card, you're going to blackmail me and tell my wife and expose me and put my pictures on the internet. Highly, highly arousing to the person who's doing this, to both of these people. It's like BDSM, bondage, discipline, sadomasochism, without rope. And you might think, whoa, this sounds really crazy. And sometimes there's no sex happening, right? There's not even masturbation. It's just the idea that I've given over my life to somebody. It's the idea that somebody gave me access to their money and now I have power over them. Consensual, non-exploitive. It's not intended to ruin somebody, but the idea of almost being ruined, almost being play blackmail, play exploitation. Some people get into it. And I'm telling you some outrageous things because it's not outrageous to the people who enjoy it. And you need to know that a lot of things can feel sexual. I didn't really have time to get into straight men who have sex with men. I have 5 minutes, but I do want you to hear that, and you can read it. I've written a book about it. All over the internet. It's in this PowerPoint. There are multiple reasons why straight men have sex with men that have nothing to do with being gay or bisexual, particularly when chemicals are involved, particularly when trauma is involved. When trauma is involved, you have a male perpetrator on a little boy. That little boy, if unhealed and unresolved, is going to grow up and what I call return to the scene of the sexual crime. And he will engage in sexual contact with another man, but they're not sexual urges. They're trauma urges. They're not sexual urges. They're trauma urges. And that's different. Eroticized trauma urges are different than sexual pleasure and orientation urges. So it's complicated. It's complex. It's nuanced. And I love it. I love it because you can't assume anything. You have to be willing to go. And it's okay. I even have this happen to me after all these years. Sometimes I'll hear something new and I'm like, what the fuck is that? That's crazy. I don't say it. I think it. And then I go research it and I look it up and I talk to people and I get supervision. I'm like, okay, it's not so crazy. I don't like it. I wouldn't do that. But this person does. And I'm not going to shame them because they do, as long as it's consensual and agreed upon and doesn't put them at risk for harm. That's it. I think I'm done, right? That's the hour.
Thank you so much, Dr. Joe Kort. I've been wanting to just say hallelujah like 10 times already. You makes me, as a gay man living in a non-monogamous relationship, as a fetishist living with HIV, with sex work experience, safe. And I could kind of sense from the audience here that not everyone is as comfortable with this. And I just want to tell to the audience that if you don't want to work with that uncomfortableness, then you won't be able to help that chemsex participant who is asking for your help. So if anything of this was uncomfortable, then you are not the person that we want to send our patients to. So you need to work with that. So is there any questions for Dr. Joe Kort? Hello, Dr. Joe Kort.
Yes.
Thank you for your inspiring and energetic presentation. I've got actually 2 questions for you. One, and I might have taken it out of context. I saw a slide pass by very quickly. You did not go into that one. And it said, never use LGBTQ community, never use the word community. And maybe I took it out of context. I'm not sure, but if you could just give us some more information on that. That's one question.
Thank you. Yeah, I went by that too fast because this isn't an LGBT. This PowerPoint I used for something else and I didn't take it out. No, what that should say, what I say is people will call the LGBT like an alternative lifestyle. And that for me as a gay man, straight life is an alternative lifestyle. So instead of saying alternative lifestyle, you should say community. That's what that slide means.
Okay, so I took it out of context. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah. No, good.
And the other one is, what is your opinion on support groups like Sex and Love, Anonymous, Addiction Anonymous?
I'm mixed on it. I like the cognitive behavioral tools people get. I like the community support. I was identified as a sex addict for 20 years. That's why I think I can talk about sex so well, because every week, 3 times a week, I was going to that meeting talking about my fetish and kinks that I was calling a sex addiction. So it gave me community. It gave me a place to keep talking about and desensitize myself. What I hate about those meetings is people coming in and saying, yeah, my sex addiction therapist told me that I shouldn't masturbate, so I'm 4 days sober because masturbation was problematic for me, and so now I can never masturbate again. That makes me crazy that you would focus on someone's sexual act rather than helping them manage it, and maybe that's not the real problem. So that's the thing I don't like is I would send clients there, and you would see all this relapsing. They weren't relapsing; they were just trying to master their sexuality.
Thank you so much.